Hello everyone, and welcome to the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. We're in a wonderful time where vaccines, at least in the US and in the UK, are available widespread, available to whoever wants them. So we're entering a stage of post-pandemic recovery. And that's great. I'm so excited about it. And you and I and everyone need to figure out how to survive and thrive in this new stage in our lives, this post-pandemic recovery. And that's what today's show is about, how to survive and thrive in the post-pandemic recovery. So the first thing to understand is to go back to the context, the history. What happened with COVID? Very briefly, of course. It very much disrupted our reality, very much changed everything in March 2020 with the lockdowns. It upended our professional lives, it upended our personal lives. All of these were changed drastically, dramatically by COVID, whether it's our households that were disrupted, whether it's our jobs that were disrupted. All of that led to massive work-life imbalance, led to a lot of changes, led to a lot of shifts. So that's the broader context from which we're coming into this post-pandemic recovery. And again, there were lots of cycles of up, down, COVID surge, not surge, conflicts over masks and not masks, issues with working from home, all of that sort of stuff. That's where we're coming from. So we have to understand the context with which we're going into the post-pandemic recovery and face this new abnormal, this post-pandemic recovery, with clear eyes. Not just kind of, rainbows and unicorns and denying everything that happened, but with clear eyes. We must acknowledge what's real, what are the facts on the ground here, where we're coming from, how people are thinking, how people are feeling this history of the pandemic. For the goals, what are the goals of doing so? We want to thrive and not just survive. So thriving means flourishing. That means in every area of your life, doing what you want to do. In your professional life, achieving your goals. In your personal life, achieving your goals. In your fitness, health, whatever, all sorts of things. With your family, with your social life, that's personal life. Your professional life, your career, your business, your organization, whatever it is. Thriving, meaning achieving your goals, feeling fulfilled. Not just surviving, not just getting by. That's the goal of succeeding effectively in this new post-pandemic recovery, in this new post-pandemic reality, which is we're still not quite there yet. We're in the recovery stage from the pandemic, in the tail end of the pandemic, so we say. And to do so effectively, we must fight these dangerous judgment errors known as cognitive biases, which you've probably heard before if you've checked out the Wise Decision Maker show. These are the dangerous judgment errors we make as human beings just because of how our brains are wired. Our brains are not wired for the modern environment. They're wired for the savannah environment. When we lived in small tribes of 15 people to 150 people, and we had to respond to threats very immediately, life or death situations with the fight or flight response. And you might have heard of it as a saber-toothed tiger response, where you have to jump at 100 shadows in order to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. You might notice there are many less saber-toothed tigers in the modern environment, but we still react with a fight or flight response, and we still have a very strong tribal response in the modern environment. Neither of those are great, and there are many, many other problems that come from the savannah environment. The specific ways that our brain goes wrong because of the savannah environment, because of its structure of the brain, are called cognitive biases. These are mental blind spots that lead us to make bad judgment errors. The biggest one for the pandemic and the post-pandemic recovery is called the normalcy bias. The normalcy bias, that's the biggest problem for the post-pandemic recovery stage in which we're in right now, as well as it was for the pandemic. That's the perception that the future will be much like today. That was a safe bet in the savannah environment. What's going to change? The seasons is the main change, For winter, spring, summer, fall, that's the main change in the savannah environment. But that's not what happens in the modern environment. Our environment is very disrupted. Very disrupted by the pandemic, before that the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis, by things like the rise of the smartphone, the rise of the internet, and so on. I can still remember back to the 1990s when you had to get on the internet for the phone that sound ee. For those, I'm aging, clearly I'm aging myself. But yes, this is something that really revealing my age. But that's something that it was a major disruptor from my environment, from my life. And it's something that is a major factor in our modern environment, that despite us feeling that the future will be much like today, that things will be normal, that's not what actually ends up happening. The future is much more disrupted than we feel it is. So it's much more disrupted. And thus, we tend to minimize the impact of the disruption of the pandemic. So we minimize the impact of the pandemic's disruption, despite the fact that the post-pandemic recovery will not go back to what we imagined, everything being normal, the prior pandemic, the anti-pandemic normal. That's what we imagine. But we will never go back to that time, that prior to the pandemic, January 2020. That's just not in the cards. Things happened, we changed, our life changed, and we'll keep a lot of these changes that came from the pandemic. This pandemic changed our habits, how we behave. I mean, how long did we stay under lockdown, masks, working from home, virtual interactions, all of that sort of stuff, ordering groceries online, whatever you're doing, all of that sort of stuff, not seeing our families. Values, what we value, what we care about, risks, problems, health, issues, all of those are changed in significant ways. Our preferences, what we prefer to do. I mean, so many people now prefer much more to work from home. We have surveys indicating that over half of all employees who work from home would much rather work from home more than half the time rather than go back to the office. And that's a serious issue. We have plenty of other preferences. I mean, let's say people are cooking at home much more, so the people will not be going out to restaurants nearly the same rate as they were previously. Our desires, and so on. All of these things are changed in fundamental ways. What we value, what we want, our habits, our preferences. So everything will not go back to normal. So after the pandemic, some of the things that you need to be thinking about, there will continue to be a lot more work from home. And this is not simply coming from the employee surveys. Employers are definitely planning to do a lot more hybrid work where people are mostly working from home, downsizing their office. Some companies are moving to fully remote, allowing some or all workers to work fully remotely. And this is not only tech companies. This is major old traditional companies like, let's say, Nationwide Insurance right here where I am in Columbus, Ohio. Go Bucks. So that's companies moving a lot of people to the home, working from home, and I've helped a number of companies transition to having some at least of their employees work from home permanently, and many, all who are capable basically of having a hybrid model of them coming in maybe like 2 days a week or so, and some coming in with the ones who are working permanently from home maybe once a quarter to meet with their teams. So work from home will continue. And hybrid work will continue. That will just continue to a large extent after the pandemic. We will have a lot more virtual interactions, of course, not only at work, but in all sorts of professional settings where we have professional meetings and personal meetings where we meet with people, where we interact with service professionals, let's say our lawyers, real estate, or someone, checking out some house in a different state where we want to move or so on. We're not going to go there. We're going to have those virtual tours and so on. Lots more virtual interactions of various sorts. Virtual interactions, game night will be a lot more virtual. So social life will be a lot more virtual. Entertainment will be a lot more virtual. People will be doing much more streaming. Concerts will not come back at the previous rate they were, theaters and so on, no matter how much these venues believe they will. Fitness, people are going to do a lot more online fitness, a lot more of everything that they were doing at home after the pandemic. Of course, gyms will see a pickup and yoga studios, but not nearly to the same extent that they had before the pandemic. Education, a lot more online education will continue to take place even after the pandemic, no question about it. So, and more broadly, there will be an orientation toward risk avoidance. Folks throughout the world, I can guarantee you this, will be much more wary of risks, will be much more avoidant of risks after the pandemic, in this post-pandemic recovery and after the pandemic than they were before. So this is a substantial shift These are all substantial shifts that you need to be thinking about for yourself, for your organization, for your household, what will be happening in this post-pandemic recovery and after the pandemic itself ends. Now, what you want to understand in order to survive and thrive, so understanding these shifts, facing reality, understanding we will never go back to January 2020, you want to define your post-pandemic needs. So what's going to be happening with yourself? What are these fundamental needs? Because the habits, values, preferences, desires changed, but our underlying needs didn't. So think about what are these underlying needs and how do you satisfy them? Because those needs, those wants, they remain the same, those underlying fundamental urges. And there are three in particular which need to be satisfied, three needs which you need to satisfy in order to make sure that you survive and thrive. That make sure that you survive and thrive. Here are the three critical needs that you need to satisfy. So satisfy them differently though than you did before the pandemic. So let's talk about those three needs that you need to satisfy in a different way before the pandemic. So fundamental needs of connection. So first, connecting with others. You'll need to meet this differently after the pandemic because we'll have a lot more virtual interactions. You'll still have a lot more virtual interactions with your colleagues because you'll be doing hybrid work or maybe full-time remote work, and that will happen. I mean, even people who are full-time in the office will be doing a lot more virtual meetings than they previously did, no matter how much or little you might like virtual meetings. So connection with colleagues and connection with other people in your household, in your community. You'll be doing a lot more virtual connection than you previously were. So that's something for you to realize and understand. That's something, these trends will be happening. And you need to figure out where you fall in these trends and how you'll make sure that you satisfy your needs, your desires for connection in a different way. And of course, in the post-pandemic recovery, we're still on the tail end of the pandemic. You have to be thinking about, well, who's vaccinated, who's not, how do I interact with them, masks on, masks off in their house, and so on, in the job, in the workplace, and so on. All of these sorts of things will be part of the conversation that we're entering into in the post-pandemic recovery. Then safety. Of course, some of these things we're talking about have to do with safety of masks on, masks off, but also keeping yourself safe from risks. Like I told you, people will be much more risk avoidant after the pandemic. And you likely are more risk avoidant after the pandemic, or in other terms, more realistic around risks, because we're clearly very much too optimistic about the risks prior to the pandemic. So think about how to prepare yourself, not simply for next pandemic, but other major disruptors in your world, in your business. For you, if you're a business leader, think about the business continuity plan for major disruptions, the next pandemic, the next solar flare, and next hurricane or tornado. Same thing for your household. How will you prepare for that? Major cyber attack, all of that sort of stuff. How will you prepare for that? So make sure that you are safe. Make sure that you have resources prepared, whatever resources you need to stay safe in your professional life and in your personal life. So that's one. That's the next thing. And the last one that you need to, as a fundamental need to meet, is your self-esteem. Now, connection and safety might be more obvious, but self-esteem is a really critical one. And again, this is all based on research around our fundamental needs. So self-esteem is a really critical fundamental need where we need to feel confident about ourselves, esteem ourselves, respect ourselves. And that comes from our ability to feel good about ourselves, to feel good about our role in our lives, about our progress, about the kind of life we lead, about what we want to accomplish. You might want to, for example, take up a new skill, learn something, develop yourself as a person, grow, feel good about yourself. Or if you're doing things like, let's say, raising a family, make sure that you're raising your family in a way that makes you feel proud that you're raising your kids in a certain way, or that you're running your business in a certain way, or that you're developing your career in a certain way. All of these sorts of things feed into your self-esteem. And you got to be thinking about how do you fulfill that need in this post-pandemic recovery, in this different time. So think about that. Think about how to fulfill these different needs in this different time, this post-pandemic environment, the tail end of the pandemic and the post-pandemic environment, the connection need, the safety need, the self-esteem, because we're never going back to that idyllic time of January 2020. We will have a lot more virtual interactions. People will be a lot more risk avoidant. There will be a lot more hybrid and remote work. So think about all these things as we're entering the post-pandemic recovery to make sure that you survive and thrive in your professional and your personal life. All right, this has been another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. I hope you've liked this show. If so, make sure to subscribe to it on whatever venue you're listening to or watching it. We have both a video cast and a podcast version, so please check those out in the show notes. A lot more information about how to survive and thrive in the pandemic is going to be, and the post-pandemic recovery is going to be in the show notes with blogs, books, and so on. And I hope that you will comment on the show. How did you like it? We'd love to hear your comments, love to hear your feedback. Please leave your thoughts in the comment notes, leave a review on whatever venue you're checking us out. All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this show, and I will look forward to seeing you next time on the Wise Decision Maker Show. And until that time, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.